WHIP, Philadelphia's #1 college radio station. We've got a great guest lined up for you today. His name is James Walker. He is an ESPN beat writer for the Miami Dolphins. He formerly covered the Cleveland Cavaliers and the Cleveland Browns, and most importantly, he is a Temple grad. James, thank you so much for joining us today. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on. And that music actually reminds me of the Chicago Bulls during their championship years with Michael Jordan. I don't think that's necessarily fitting for this year's Dolphins and Eagles team that we're about to talk about. So that's pretty funny.
Yeah, it is most definitely far from that truth. And I got to say, James, it is not easy being a Philadelphia fan. But lucky for you and your Dolphins, hey, they pulled that one out this past weekend.
Well, they're not necessarily.
With that in mind, though, the game was 16-3. You know, the Eagles forced a safety at the very beginning of the game, and that was the third game in a row. It was the first time since 1980 that a team has accomplished a feat like that. And I got to say, it's very impressive for the Dolphins. But I want to hear about what you saw when it comes to the resilience of that Dolphins team, because they were down 16-3, and they showed you something against a really good defense.
Well, it was the first time they've overcome a 13-point deficit all season. That was a season high. And for the first time, they really showed grit. And I think that's something that you wouldn't use to describe this year's Dolphins team. Usually when they fall behind 7 points, 10 points, 14 points, it's usually a wrap for them. They're not really a come-from-behind team, especially on the road. But they put some things together. They blocked the punt. That was key. Caleb Sturgis missed a field goal. That gave them some momentum. And before you know it, it was a 3-point game at halftime. And so I think that second quarter really springboarded them, because they outplayed the Eagles for the final 3 quarters, but their first quarter was really so bad that it ended up being a 1-point game down to the end.
Yeah, it was so close. I mean, this game could have gone either way. Obviously, a huge blow to the Eagles as Sam Bradford is out with what could have been a much more significant injury, but he appears to be out for about a couple weeks. He was actually playing a great game up to that point. He was 19 for 25. He had a quarterback rating of 118. He threw for a touchdown. You know, he's been gradually getting better, and that's a big blow to this Eagles team. You've seen a lot of Mark Sanchez. Again, you've covered the Miami Dolphins since 2008. What did you expect from Sanchez in that second half of the game, if you will?
Pretty much what he did, which was have a big turnover at the end. And I've covered Mark Sanchez since the beginning of his career. He started fast, made the playoffs for 2 consecutive years, even though the defense with the New York Jets sort of carried him to that point when he was a young quarterback. But he's always been one of those guys that, you know, could drive a team down the field, but then eventually make a big mistake. When you throw the ball too much with Mark Sanchez, eventually he's going to, you know, either have a big fumble or throw a big interception, which he did in the end zone against Rashad Jones. And the Eagles were really in field goal range. I really kind of blame the coaching staff on that, because there's no reason for them to not run the ball 3 times, force the Dolphins to spend all their timeouts, and just kick the field goal and take the lead and see if the defense can win the game. But, you know, in Chip Kelly's MO is always to be aggressive, always to run as many plays as possible. They were going for the touchdown when they didn't really need one, and it cost them. Rashad Jones, the Dolphins safety, is really having his best year of his career, so to throw in his direction, you know, was a big mistake, and that really helped the Dolphins pull out a close game.
Yeah, I agree with you, James. That was a tough one for the Eagles. This is David Hennessey here. Thanks for joining us, by the way.
How's it going?
Pretty good. I just have a question for you. So what do you think was the difference between that first quarter and then the final 3? What switch flipped for the Dolphins?
Well, pressure on the quarterback. And momentum as well. The Dolphins have been an awful first quarter team all season, and it didn't really matter the head coach, whether it was Joe Philbin or Dan Campbell. This has been an issue for them, you know, all year. And as you guys mentioned, the 3 consecutive safeties, ironically, all 3 safeties in each of those games happened in the first quarter. So their first quarter, you know, starting out slow was really not a surprise for them. But difference in this one was their second, third, and fourth quarters where they really started to gain momentum. That's something that I hadn't really seen from them in games, especially on the road this year. So I think, you know, pressuring the quarterback. They sacked Sam Bradford 4 times. They got 10 hits total on Sam Bradford and Mark Sanchez that, you know, obviously knocked Sam Bradford out of the game eventually. So, yeah, I think pressure on the quarterback and also just getting that momentum going on the road, which the Dolphins really hadn't done once they fell behind all year.
The Dolphins, like you said, you know, they moved on from Philbin. They were 1-3 under Philbin, and now with Dan Campbell, they're actually 3-2. It's great for you guys. Again, you mentioned that you really haven't seen that like late game resiliency until more recently. How much of that do you attribute to Dan Campbell, and what are your initial impressions of interim tight end coach and now head coach Dan Campbell?
Well, I think the mental and physical toughness, a lot of it, probably about at least 75% of it goes to Dan Campbell. That's something that he's really brought to the team in terms of working on in practice. Joe Philbin went kind of soft on the team this year because they had back-to-back collapses in 2013 and 2014 in December, where the team was kind of beat up and couldn't really make that playoff push down to the end. So when Philbin came into this year, his strategy was going to have sort of a softer training camp, didn't really push the guys too hard early in the season, and it ended up hurting him on the field on game days when they sort of played how they practiced. So when Dan Campbell made the switch, one of the first things he switched was to be physical, to have physical practices, faster practices, and you sort of seen the product most weeks on the field. As far as his long-term prospects, I mean, this is really going to determine in these next 7 games. As you mentioned, he's 3-2. I think he has a lot more work to do. The first 4 games are not his fault, obviously, so if they don't make the playoffs, I don't necessarily think that that's a death blow for him potentially getting the job. But I think as long as he finishes with a winning record, whether it's 2 games above 500 or something like that, down the stretch since he took over, I think that'll at least get him a serious look in the coaching search, which they're going to have in January.
Yeah, you say that he's made this team more physical. What impact has that had on quarterback Ryan Tannehill?
As far as physicality, not that much, other than them running the ball a lot more. They've run the ball a lot more than Dan Campbell. They had 26 attempts for 99 yards on Sunday against the Eagles. And to me, that shows, even though they're averaging just 3.8 yards a carry, they're at least sticking to the run. Lamar Miller got 16 carries. They had a rookie, Jay Ajayi, who did pretty well, had 8.0 yards per carry. So they're at least committing to the run a lot more instead of letting Ryan Tannehill throw the ball 40, 45 times a game, which is usually a recipe for disaster. Either he's going to make a mistake or he's going to get sacked. So I think that's really helped him in terms of, just not putting too much on his shoulders, because he's not a franchise quarterback that you can, sort of throw the ball 45 times around a lot and expect him to throw for 400 yards every week and 5 touchdowns. He's not Aaron Rodgers. He's not some of these elite quarterbacks out there. So he needs a running game. He needs some things right around him, and that's really their best formula for success.
Hey, James, this is JT. Once again, thank you for joining us.
JT, what's going on?
Doing good. How are you? My question would be, how do you think the coaching change has affected the culture, both in the locker room and amongst the fan base of the Miami Dolphins? I have a few Miami Dolphins fan friends, and they are pretty much fed up with Philbin. So what's the sense around the organization with the players and then both with the fan base?
Well, there's more optimism, for sure. And the thing that sort of figured, the Dolphins had was a disconnect between the coaching staff and the players early in the year. There were certain things, especially schematically, defensively, that the players sort of wanted to do, they thought was the best way to go about it, and the defensive coaching staff, with Kevin Coyle, Joe Philbin as head coach, they wanted to do certain other things defensively. And I think that disconnect sort of showed on the field, where they weren't really getting maximum effort. Guys weren't necessarily running through a wall for the coaching staff, so a change definitely needed. Now, when Dan Campbell came in, players didn't really know what to expect. Yes, he was tight ends coach, so the tight end group kind of knew what Dan Campbell wanted. But as far as the entire team, Dan Campbell didn't really have that much interaction with, say, the defensive backs or linebackers or the special teams group and stuff like that. So the first thing he did was change the culture as far as being more physical in practice. And I think players sort of gravitated towards that. I think they agreed that that's what they needed. And it's really showed on the field in most weeks. So, he's 3-2 at this point, but it's a long season ahead of him. But it's not your typical interim situation where, a coach comes in with just 2 games remaining as interim coach because the guy got fired after 14 games and he only has 2 games to show what he can do. Dan Campbell is actually getting 3/4 of a season to show what he can do. So it's a lengthy interview process. It's not something that's going to be made. The decision is not going to be made next week or in 2 weeks from now. So it's really one of those things where you just have to wait and see how things play out.
All right. Now, James, I gotta be honest with you. I am a diehard Jets fan.
That's fine.
But I like seeing good competition amongst the division. But with all these coaching changes throughout the division, you have Todd Bowles in New York, you have Rex Ryan in Buffalo, Campbell now with Miami. Can you now see a changing of the guard in a sense when it comes to these teams? I mean, this division has been mediocre at best, throughout since Tom Brady's reign. I mean, he's basically won the division almost every year since he's been the starter. Do you see these coaching shifts now bringing these teams into a more competitive light, to contend?
Well, the division is getting more competitive. And by the way, I'm not a Dolphins fan. I just cover the team, so being a Jets fan doesn't bother me one bit. But the coaching changes, definitely make things more competitive. But to me, this is still the Brady and Belichick division. I've been calling it that for probably 10 years now. Since those two have been together, they've won a division pretty much every year except in 2008. So until that changes, and it won't change this year, the Patriots are already off to a 9-0 start. So they're already on track to win the division. They'll probably have it wrapped up within the next few weeks here. I just don't see that changing. The Patriots are just too smart. They're too good. They've been running the same program for the last 13 years, so players know what to expect when they come into the program. So they have things figured out when it comes to the AFC East. So I think the best chance for the Jets and the Bills and maybe the Dolphins, if they can get their act together in this second half of the season, is to make a wild card run, because there's really no chance for either of those teams winning the division.
Speaking of the Patriots, James, I want to play a little game with you called Yes or No and Why. Tom Brady, is he the greatest quarterback of all time? Yes or no, and why?
Yes, he's the greatest quarterback that I've seen personally. There's a lot of old timers that might say Johnny Unitas. I have seen Joe Montana play when I was younger, so I would say if he's not number one, he's the top two. So I would go yes, and why? Because he's the best that I've seen with my own eyes personally. So
just to reiterate, who would you potentially have over Tom Brady?
Joe Montana.
Joe Montana. Okay. Yes, no, or why? Can Ryan Tannehill lead this team to, like you said, a wild card berth and potentially a Super Bowl?
No. That's the absolute no from what I've seen. He has a losing record as a quarterback. You pretty much have to build the perfect team around him or near perfect team around him for them to win a Super Bowl. As far as the playoffs, team has to get better. It won't happen this year. But I think, with 5 home games in the last 7 weeks, they at least have a chance. But I just haven't seen enough consistency from the team or from him personally to think that they can make the playoffs this year or win a Super Bowl in the near future.
We're talking with ESPN Dolphins beat writer and Temple graduate James Walker. James, yes, no, or why? Going back to the Patriots, Giants, and mixing in the little Eagles division action here. Yes, no, or why? Is this the last time that we'll see the Giants play the Patriots this season?
Yes, because Giants will not make the Super Bowl, and the Patriots have a really good chance to make it in the AFC. But if you put the pairing and the odds together between the two, the odds are against both teams making the Super Bowl at the same time. So just strictly playing the odds and the numbers, I don't foresee a Giants-Patriots Super Bowl.
Just to follow up on that, who do you think is going to, after seeing what you saw Sunday, and I presume you've gotten a good look at the Giants being New York team, who do you think wins the NFC East?
Wow, NFC East, and the Dolphins play all these teams this year, so I've gotten to see, I'll see the Giants on Monday Night Football as well next month, close up. I don't see the Eagles doing it. I definitely don't see the Cowboys doing it. Even with Tony Romo back, I just think they have a little bit of a deficit. I gotta give it to the Giants. I've seen the Redskins in Week 1. The Dolphins beat them in Week 1. They're sort of up and down. Some weeks they look like world beaters. The other weeks they're stumbling all over themselves. A lot of inconsistency in the division, but I think the Giants probably hold on and pull it out in the final couple weeks of the season.
Yeah, they've definitely had a couple losses this season where they were just so close, but it came down to one play at the end of the game, and it went against them. Now, usually in sports, those things tend to balance out, so maybe you'll see that in the final 6 games for the G-Men. Last question for you, James. Yes or no, and why? Did the Patriots cheat?
Did the Patriots cheat? Wow.
In terms of Spygate.
Oh, okay. Spygate, yes. I mean, that was confirmed as far as they had video evidence of it. And also, the league penalized them for that. So even just by the terms of the punishment and the evidence, it says yes. Now, did other teams do it? I think that's a more complex question. There, no one else got caught, videotaping signals. So from that perspective, the Patriots were caught cheating. So therefore, by definition, they did cheat during Spygate.
Now, you don't have to expand on this, but I'm just curious. Is it safe to say that Tom Brady is the Barry Bonds of football?
I don't necessarily understand the comparison.
In terms of wrongdoing, if you will.
I would say no, absolutely not. I think Tom Brady deserves just about every accolade that he gets, and I think he's the real deal.
He's definitely the real deal. He's a spectacular quarterback. James, I want to thank you so much for your time today. We're up against it. Really appreciate it.
All right, no problem, guys. Keep up the good work.
Will do. That was James Walker. He is a Dolphins beat writer for ESPN and a Temple alum. Thank him so much again. We're going to take a quick break here at WHIP, Philadelphia's #1 college radio station.